Well, I'm not a stock guru myself. I always say that very clearly. I'm just here documenting my own investing journey, as well as sharing some thoughts and hopefully some timeless wisdom and insights into the world of investing and personal finance. But I'm always happy to learn from people who are much smarter than me, who've been doing this full-time professionally, who are real investors and manage a huge portfolio, right? As you know, I'm a big fan of Warren Buffett and many other great investors that I look to for inspiration. And one of the biggest, most public investors these days, it seems, is actually a woman, which there aren't really too many publicly out there, but one very famous, probably all of you have come across one way or the other, is Casey Wood. She is the CEO of Ark Investment, and it's probably hard to read or watch the news without seeing any mention of her. She's really public, really outgoing, which I guess is good for her, builds her persona. But I thought, why not look into her investment returns, right? If she's so brilliant, so great, let's see how her company has actually been performing over time. So maybe we, as everyday normal retail investors, can get some inspiration from it. Or maybe not. So let's have a look, dive in and see what she's actually investing in. Right, so if we head over to the website, Ark Investment, that's basically an investment fund, investment company that she has. And they do many different things, right? They have obviously Ark Research, which is their research division, which they have analysts looking at the trends and what's happening in the coming years and so forth. So quite interesting. And anyone can actually go in here and get some really interesting research and ideas. And they have some nice articles, I must say. So that's really nice. So they're really looking out for the trends, what's happening. You see the big ideas for 2024, which you can read as well. So you kind of get a deep dive of what they're looking, pursuing and seeing for the coming quarters or years ahead even. So I quite liked it. And again, Casey Wood, like her or not, but she's really well spoken, quite smart lady, I would say in many ways. Of course, we'll look if the investment returns do her justice, but as a person, I think she's quite smart and brilliant in many ways. And I like her future vision that she has, and we'll see if that actually comes to fruition or not. Then they also have an Ark Venture Fund. So here you basically invest into private companies. So we'll see over here if we scroll down. So these are all private companies that are not yet listed, companies such as SpaceX, Epic Games, Anthropic, Discord. So here you could technically become an early investor, which could be quite interesting, right? If they really materialize and do go public, you might have an edge on that. But in this video, we want to focus on the ETF. I'm really a passionate ETF investor myself. I mostly invest into the S&P 500. So for me, that's really the golden benchmark. So let's see how the Ark fund performed versus the S&P. And here you see they have a number of different funds that you can possibly invest in if you wanted to trust your money with Ark Investment. So Ark Investment, you have to imagine almost like a Vanguard or a BlackRock that have their own funds as well. Some of the funds that mimic indexes such as the S&P 500 or for example, the CAC 40, the 40 biggest companies in France. So here they have their own funds where they compile their own companies that they believe in, and they have different themes to it, right? You see here Ark Innovation ETF. That's arguably their biggest fund. Then they have also fintech innovations. That's really centered around fintech. They have 3D printing funds. So if you really believe into 3D printing, then you can invest into that specific ETF. If you wanted to genomic revolution, if you're into this kind of things, space exploration, autonomous tech and robotics, Israel innovative technology, next generation internet, and a venture fund that we mentioned just before. And you see, of course, each fund comes with a different expense ratio, right? I'm always advocating to really look closely at the expense ratio because that goes directly out of your returns, right? If you make 10% return from your investments, but the fund charges you, for example, as it does over here, the venture fund 2.9%, now all of a sudden your actual return is only 7.1% in this very example, right? So expense ratio is definitely important. And of course, they charge more because, obviously they have a big company to pay for. It's definitely way more expensive than, for example, if you were to invest into a low-cost index fund like I do myself, S&P 500, I use it from State Street. I currently pay 0.03%. So significantly cheaper, but I'm sure they will make up for it in superior returns. So let's have a look into this. And obviously, let's focus on the biggest one to start with. And we can actually filter over here the 5-year return. So we want the best performing one over a 5-year period. And well, 5-year returns, the best one is only 11%. So that's already quite, surprising to see because we know, of course, the S&P performed significantly high. We talk about an average annual return of around 9% for the S&P 500. So here in 5 years, that's all 5 years together, they only returned 11.7%. And if we go down the list, actually, we have quite a few funds in the loss, which is quite shocking, I must say, for such a renowned company that's always in the news and seems to know it all. It just shows outperforming the market is really not as easy as it may sound. But be it as it may, let's click into the Ark Innovation ETF because that's really their flagship ETF, the biggest one. So let's go into this over here and see how that did over time. Let's start with the fund objective. They highlight some of the areas that they want to invest in with that fund. You see all those various, themes. So basically that's in line with their research. They do the research first. They see what might be relevant in the coming years, and then they build a fund around those topics, themes into the companies that they see can capitalize on those opportunities in the future. That's kind of idea, right? So you're really investing into the future in a way. But of course, we also want returns, right? I don't want to have the return in 20 years because it may or may not happen. Now, it actually has been around for almost 10 years now. So it has been started back in 2014. Expense ratio, we looked at it. Typical holdings, 35 to 55. So quite large actually for such a specific fund. Right, once again, you see over here the management fee, a straightforward 0.75%. So that's obviously per year and it will be deducted from your returns. It's not something you pay. They just take it out of your returns that you'll be getting from them. So yeah, when we look at the net asset value, the NAV over here over a 5-year period, minus 1.19%. And since inception, so pretty much the 10-year period, up by 9.5%. So that's what we usually say the S&P returns in 1 year. So yeah, I would really call it underperformance and quite shocking to see. Now, of course, you invest into the future, but again, they did that promise 10 years ago, right? So if you started 10 years ago with the promise by investing into Ark Innovation, you'll be capitalizing on that in the coming years. Great, right? I understand. It's like investing into a startup. It will take certain years. But now we talk about a 10-year period and they're still lagging massively behind. Now let's look at the holdings over here and you see the top 10 holdings. Obviously you mentioned they have around 35 to 55. Some of them come in and out, but these are the biggest ones by weighting. And you see obviously right away, the biggest one being Tesla. Now she's very outspoken towards Tesla, that she likes it, the robo-taxis, all these things coming up. So there's always something to look forward to in her eyes. But again, so far we haven't seen it really materializing. They have currently a weighting of 13.7%. So definitely the biggest holding in the investments. Then we have Roku, Coinbase, Roblox, Block, CRISPR, Palantir, Robinhood, Shopify, and Intellia Therapeutics. Now, I'm not super into each and every one of them, but yeah, when I look at companies like Robinhood or Roku, these are certainly not companies that I would ever personally invest in. And when we look at the exposure, it's pretty much consolidated around North American companies listed in the US basically. So hopping over to Seeking Alpha, we can see once again here the holdings and just click into a couple of them. For example, Tesla, of course, when we see the 5-year performance of Tesla, well, they did very well, right? So over a 10-year period even, they're up 1000%. So that should really reflect positively on the Ark Innovation Fund, right? Because they seem to have invested at a good time. Now, I don't know exactly the price point, when they went in and so forth, but overall, they should have really benefited from it. So that means a lot of the other investments didn't do too well. So let's look into that. For example, Roku. Wow, we can see over a 5-year period down 58%. So yeah, that's really upsetting for investors, right? But again, of course, these things happen, right? Not every investment is going to be a winner, but let's look into the other ones and you will see a similar story. I mean, you see over here Coinbase, when they started back in 2021, we still lower than the price it started at. So also not the smartest investment, at least for time being. Maybe again, in 20 years, it will be a different story. But for now, it has already been a couple of years. They haven't really performed to expectations. CRISPR Therapeutics, let's look into this. Up 2% over 5 years. Over 10 years, pretty much flatlined, right? So really also didn't really come to fruition the way I guess they would have hoped for. Robinhood, look at it. Back in 2021 when they went public, we're still below the price that they opened at. Also, not a great investment. Intellia Therapeutics, they started back in 2016 and you see here the price was $23. Now we're down to $22. So also less than they started off almost 8 years ago. So most of their investments did not turn out the way I guess they would have hoped for. So yeah, if I compare it to the S&P 500 over a 5-year period, they're down 3.81% while the S&P is up by 101%. You doubled your money over a 5-year period, while with Ark, you would have slightly lost money, which is absolutely crazy. Now over a 10-year period, it looks a little bit better, but still almost only half the returns with Ark than you would have gotten if you would have simply invested into the S&P 500. And yeah, honestly, that's really impressive to see. And keep in mind, these are the total returns. On top of it, you would have paid a very high expense ratio of 0.75%, while I, who invested into the S&P 500 at 0.03% is as little as it gets, would have further grown my profits from my investment. So that's yet another point to keep in mind. So yeah, honestly, really disappointing to see those numbers. And you can see some of the other funds did even worse. So yeah, in my eyes, definitely not something where I'm going to be putting my money in. And it just shows you, even for the smartest people out there with big research team, investing teams, they are still underperforming the market. Now again, maybe in 5 or 10 years, she did all the right things and the fund will grow. But the question is, if you would be invested into that fund, putting serious money there, right? I'm not talking about a couple of €100. If you really put some serious money in there and you would see such a performance over 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and you're still down, now eventually you're probably going to be having thoughts and thinking, well, if they're really the smartest people and most capable people to manage my money, you would take out your money and then maybe redeploy it somewhere else. And in that period, you would have lost that time where you could have made some nice gains from some other investments, right? For example, the S&P or maybe some other funds that are low cost passive investing. So yeah, it just shows you it's really difficult to outperform. And for me, it's really still surprising that despite such a lack of performance, we see the lady pretty much everywhere out there in the news talking, people listening. And it's really interesting, right? Because ultimately, I think people should be measured by their successes over time. While I am sure that she is making some people some money some way or the other, overall, when I purely look at the ETF performance so far, it hasn't been impressive. Actually anything but. In fact, there's now actually an anti-Ark ETF, which is almost up 100% since they started it. So basically, that's shorting the Ark ETF. So they basically bet against the Ark ETF and seem to be doing things better than Ark themselves. So really interesting to see that. The ticker symbol is SARK. And it launched back in 2021 and is listed on the Nasdaq. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Now, of course, that was just one example of a famous investor out there. But honestly speaking, I also looked at many different ones. And if you want me to, let me know down in the comments below. I'll be happy to make future videos around other super investors, so to say, and look at their portfolios and see how they did over time versus the S&P 500, which for me is always the golden benchmark to compare other investors to, but also myself, right? Any other investments outside the S&P 500, I really look at it. Can it outperform it? Will it underperform it? So for me, it's really a benchmark of what kind of returns I should be expecting. I hope you found the video useful. If you did, please give it a like so it will be shown to more people and hopefully help them as well. Next up, check out this video here where I'm going to run you through of how much returns you as an investor can realistically expect. As always, thanks a lot for watching. Stay healthy, get wealthy, and to see you in the next one. Ciao.